I thought uncovering my wife's affair was the worst betrayal I'd ever face, until I found out the truth. Her lover wasn't just a man, it was her doctor, and he wasn't just cheating with her, he was blackmailing her. A secret affair, a dishonest doctor, and a web of lies. I never imagined these would be words tied to my life. My name's Adam, and I've been married to Rachel for 6 years. We met at a friend's wedding, and right from our first conversation, I was captivated. She had this effortless charm, a quick wit, and a smile that made everyone around her feel at ease. When she agreed to marry me, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Rachel works as a marketing executive and has always been intensely focused on her career. Late hours and last-minute meetings were just part of her routine, so I never questioned it. But recently, something felt different. It's hard to describe, but there was this growing sense of detachment between us. She started coming home later than usual, with vague explanations about project deadlines, and I couldn't help but feel uneasy. I told myself not to overthink it, after all, Rachel had always been ambitious. Still, small changes began to pile up, each adding to that gnawing sense that something was wrong. About 3 months ago, things took a noticeable turn. Rachel became overly cautious with her phone. She wouldn't leave it unattended, and if it was on the table, it was always placed face down. She even took it with her when she went to the bathroom, something she'd never done before. That knot of doubt in my gut tightened every time I noticed these small shifts. I tried brushing it off as paranoia. After all, trust is the foundation of a good marriage, but the discomfort lingered, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Around that same time, she started mentioning her new gynecologist, Dr. Mitchell. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Everyone needs regular checkups, right? But she brought him up more often than I would have expected. Casual comments like, "Dr. Mitchell is so attentive," or "he really takes his time to explain everything," started popping up in conversations. It felt innocent enough at first, but when her visits to the clinic became more frequent than usual, I couldn't shake the growing suspicion that something didn't add up. I'm not the type to accuse without reason, but deep down, my instincts were sending me a warning. Something was off. I just didn't have any proof, yet. Then, 2 weeks ago, everything came crashing down in the most unexpected way. Rachel came home one evening practically glowing with excitement. Her smile was so bright it momentarily eased my doubts. Maybe I'd been overthinking things. As I sat on the couch, half watching the news, she walked over, stood right in front of me, and, without hesitation, said, "I'm pregnant." For a few seconds, I was speechless. My heart raced as a whirlwind of emotions swept over me, joy, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite place. We hadn't been actively trying for a baby. Sure, we'd talked about it in passing, but it was always a vague, someday, plan. And now, here she was, telling me that day had arrived. I hugged her tightly, trying to process the news. A part of me was ecstatic. I'd always dreamed of being a father, and the thought of starting a family with Rachel should have been the happiest moment of my life. But then, like a shadow creeping in at the edges, that lingering unease returned. I pulled back slightly, studying her face. She looked genuinely thrilled, but I couldn't stop myself from asking the question weighing on my mind. "How far along are you?" "About 8 weeks," she replied, her smile unwavering. "I've been going to Dr. Mitchell regularly, and he confirmed it during my last appointment. That's why I've been seeing him so often." Her explanation seemed perfectly reasonable, yet it didn't ease the tension I felt. Instead, it raised new questions, ones I wasn't ready to confront. This was just the beginning of what would become a nightmare. Little did I know, the truth waiting to unravel would destroy everything I thought I knew about my wife, my marriage, and my future. And just like that, it clicked. The frequent doctor visits, the sudden secrecy, and the guarded behavior, it all seemed to fit now. At least, that's what I tried to tell myself. Maybe Rachel had been anxious about the pregnancy and didn't want to say anything until she was completely certain. I wanted to believe that this was the explanation for everything. I really did. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel relieved, even happy. I told myself that the uneasiness I had felt for weeks was just my mind playing tricks on me. But even as I tried to convince myself, there was still a whisper of doubt in the back of my head. Something about how she spoke about Dr. Mitchell felt too familiar. Too comfortable. I tried to brush it off. After all, I didn't want to ruin what should have been one of the happiest moments of our lives by overthinking. So, I hugged her again, and for the rest of the night, we talked about baby names and imagined what life as parents would be like. I did my best to focus on that future. But as the days passed, that nagging feeling of doubt only grew stronger. I couldn't shake the thought, was there something else Rachel wasn't telling me? 2 weeks after Rachel told me she was pregnant, we hit our first major milestone, the appointment where we'd find out the baby's sex. I was genuinely excited. Despite everything, I wanted this moment to feel special. I wanted it to be a fresh start, something to finally put my doubts to rest. The appointment was scheduled for 5:30 p.m., and I planned to leave work early to make sure I got there on time. But, of course, life had other plans. My boss called me into a last-minute meeting, and by the time I got out, I was already behind schedule. Frustrated, I sent Rachel a quick text, running late. On my way now. I hated being late, especially for something so important, but there was nothing else I could do. I drove as fast as I could without breaking any laws, my heart pounding with anxiety the entire way. When I finally arrived at the clinic, I hurried down the hall toward Dr. Mitchell's office, practically sprinting. As I approached the door, I slowed down to catch my breath. That's when I heard it, voices coming from inside. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard Rachel's voice, clear as day, saying something that made my stomach twist into a tight knot. Stop. Don't touch me right now. My husband will be here any minute. I froze in place, my hand hovering near the door handle. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Her voice didn't sound playful or casual, it sounded serious. Like she was reminding someone of something they already knew. A million thoughts rushed through my mind, each one more painful than the last. Was she warning Dr. Mitchell? Had I just walked into the middle of something I wasn't supposed to hear? I wanted to throw open the door and demand answers, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. Whatever was going on, I needed to stay calm if I wanted to find out the truth. Slowly, I opened the door and stepped inside. Rachel and Dr. Mitchell were standing by the ultrasound machine. They both looked up at me, startled by my sudden arrival. Dr. Mitchell quickly recovered, offering me a professional smile. "Ah, Adam, glad you could make it," he said, gesturing toward the chair next to Rachel. We were just about to start. Rachel turned toward me with a bright smile, one that felt a little too forced. "You made it just in time," she said, her voice carrying a cheerfulness that didn't quite match the tension I felt in the room. I smiled back, but my mind was spinning. Whatever I had interrupted, they were both trying way too hard to act like nothing had happened. Something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I sat down next to Rachel, but my mind was spinning. The words I had overheard outside the door, "Don't touch me now," echoed relentlessly in my head. What exactly did she mean? I tried to dismiss the thought, convincing myself that I was overanalyzing. Maybe she had just been anxious and didn't want to start the ultrasound without me. That explanation made sense, didn't it? Dr. Mitchell dimmed the lights, his tone calm and professional as he guided us through the ultrasound. He pointed to the screen, identifying the baby's head, tiny hands, and finally, the part that would reveal the baby's sex. I forced myself to focus, to be in the moment, but the unease gnawed at me. My eyes kept flicking back and forth between Rachel and Dr. Mitchell, searching for any hint of something deeper, something I wasn't supposed to notice. They both acted perfectly normal. Too normal. Maybe it really was just my imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. But I stayed quiet. I smiled at the screen, pretending to be just another excited dad, all while questions swirled inside me like a storm. After the ultrasound, we walked out of the clinic with a grainy picture of our baby in hand. Rachel was glowing, her excitement palpable. I did my best to match her energy, smiling and chatting as if nothing was bothering me. It should have been a joyful moment, one of those memories you cherish forever. But instead, all I could think about were those words I had overheard and the growing doubt clawing at my chest. On the drive home, we talked about baby names and how we'd set up the nursery. I tried to stay present, to immerse myself in the excitement of it all, but my mind kept wandering back to that strange moment in Dr. Mitchell's office. I needed answers, but I didn't want to push too hard and risk spoiling the mood. Casually, I decided to probe a little. "Hey, when's your next appointment with Dr. Mitchell?" I asked, keeping my tone light. I just want to make sure I can put it in my calendar and avoid getting stuck at work again. Rachel didn't even hesitate. "In a couple of weeks," she said smoothly, almost too quickly. "Just a routine checkup. Nothing big." I nodded, forcing a relaxed smile. Good. I just want to make sure everything's okay. Take care of yourself and the baby, all right?" She laughed softly and reached over to squeeze my hand. "You worry too much, Adam. Everything's fine." I smiled back, but inside, the knot in my stomach tightened. Was everything really fine, or was she just that good at pretending it was? I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that all of this was just in my head, that I was letting my own insecurities get the better of me. But something about her answer felt rehearsed, like she had expected the question and was ready with a response. I decided to let it go, for now. I didn't have enough to confront her without sounding paranoid, and I didn't want to stir up tension if there was no real reason. Still, the unease didn't leave me. It lingered, whispering that I wasn't ready to face what my instincts were telling me. Not yet. 2 weeks passed, and the uneasiness hadn't faded. Rachel went about her life as though everything was normal, her cheerful demeanor unchanged. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time I replayed that moment in Dr. Mitchell's office, my doubts grew stronger. What if I was missing something crucial, something she didn't want me to see? Her next appointment with Dr. Mitchell was today. She hadn't asked me to come, and I didn't offer. But as the day dragged on, I found myself unable to focus on anything else. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by sitting around, hoping for the best. So, I made a decision. I left work early without telling Rachel. I drove to the clinic and parked down the street, far enough that she wouldn't spot my car. I felt ridiculous, like some jealous husband sneaking around, but I had to know. If nothing was going on, I'd laugh at myself and move on. But if there was... I walked into the clinic, keeping my head low. I'd been there enough times to know where Dr. Mitchell's office was. My heart pounded harder with every step. As I approached the door, I hesitated for a moment. Was I making a mistake? Was I about to see something I didn't want to? Then I heard it, muffled voices from inside the room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't a typical conversation between a doctor and his patient. My fists clenched instinctively as adrenaline surged through me. Without knocking, I pushed the door open. What I saw made my blood run cold. Dr. Mitchell was leaning over Rachel, his hands on her waist in a way that was anything but professional. She was lying on the examination chair, her eyes wide with shock as she spotted me standing in the doorway. Before she could say a word, something inside me snapped. What the hell is going on here? I shouted, striding toward him, my vision blurring with rage. Grabbing him by the collar, I pulled him back from Rachel and clenched my fist. Without thinking, I swung, landing a solid punch to his jaw. He stumbled back, hitting the wall with a thud. The room fell into silence, save for the sound of my ragged breathing. Rachel stared at me, her face pale, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read, fear, guilt, or maybe both. Rachel screamed, jumping off the examination chair, her face pale and filled with fear. "Adam, stop. What are you doing?" she cried, her voice trembling. But I couldn't even look at her. My focus was locked on Dr. Mitchell, whose expression shifted from shock to a cold, calculating calm. He raised his hands slowly, as if trying to pacify me. "You're misunderstanding this," he said, his tone eerily composed. "It's not what it looks like." Those words only made my blood boil hotter. "Not what it looks like." I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "I walk in, and you're touching my wife, and you expect me to believe it's nothing?" Rachel rushed over, grabbing my arm as if to anchor me. "Adam, please, listen to me. I can explain everything," she pleaded, her eyes wide with desperation. But I wasn't ready to listen. All the doubts, all the unanswered questions I had been carrying for weeks came crashing down at once, suffocating me. I pulled my arm free, stepping back to put space between us. My mind was racing, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. As I looked at Rachel standing there, trying to steady herself, I knew whatever she was about to say, it wouldn't be enough. Not for me. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember what was said, if anything at all. All I knew was that something between us had broken, and there was no fixing it. When we got back, Rachel tried to speak again, but I cut her off before she could start. "I need time," I said curtly, walking past her without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, the look on Rachel's face when I burst in, the way Dr. Mitchell tried to downplay it all, the tension in the room that no explanation could erase. It felt like my entire world had been upended. The woman I had loved for 6 years, the future we had planned together, all of it suddenly felt like a lie. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't stay in this marriage. Trust had been shattered, and without it, what was left? I knew it would hurt, that it would be messy, but there was no other way. I couldn't live in this limbo, constantly wondering what else she was hiding. I took the day off work, telling my boss that I had a family emergency. Driving to a lawyer's office felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. But deep down, I knew it was necessary. If I didn't take action now, I'd never be able to move forward. The lawyer, Thomas, listened intently as I laid out everything, the sudden changes in Rachel's behavior, the uneasy feeling I'd been carrying for weeks, and finally, the incident at the clinic. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. When I was finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "Adam, I'm really sorry you're going through this," he said, his voice steady. "If you're sure this is what you want, we can get started on the divorce process right away. It'll take some time, but we'll make sure it's handled properly." There wasn't a shred of hesitation in my response. "Yes. Let's do it." Thomas explained the steps ahead, the paperwork, the division of assets, how things would likely proceed. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me. She looked anxious, pacing back and forth across the living room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. The moment I walked through the door, she rushed toward me. "Adam, please, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. "I can explain everything. Just, please, let me explain." "It's too late, Rachel," I said, my voice cold and final. "I've already filed for divorce." Her face went blank for a moment, like she couldn't process what I had just said. Then, slowly, her expression crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Adam, no. Please, you have to listen. It's not what you think." "I don't need to listen to anything," I said sharply. "I trusted you, Rachel. I trusted you, and you broke that trust. I'm done. She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, keeping the distance between us. Please, she whispered through her tears. I'm pregnant, with our baby. Her words hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But after everything, how could I? How could I trust that this child was even mine? I don't know what to believe anymore, I said quietly, my voice trembling. You say it's our baby, but how am I supposed to trust you after everything? Rachel broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, an urge to reach out and comfort her. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I had spent weeks drowning in doubt and confusion. This was my chance to finally break free. I'll let the lawyers handle everything from here, I said, turning toward the door. I don't want to talk anymore. As I walked away, her sobs echoed through the house, each one slicing through me like a blade. A part of me wanted to turn back, to try to understand how we had ended up here. But I knew if I did, I would be pulled back into the same cycle of doubt and deception. Filing for divorce had been the hardest decision of my life, but it was also the only path forward. I had to protect myself, even if it meant walking away from the life I had built with Rachel. I knew confronting Dr. Mitchell head-on wouldn't accomplish anything, he'd just deny everything, and without solid proof, I wouldn't have a case. I needed undeniable evidence, something that could not only expose him but also destroy his career. If he had been manipulating Rachel and covering up whatever had been going on, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The answers had to be on Rachel's phone. After everything had come to light, I noticed she wasn't as guarded about it anymore. Maybe she thought there was nothing left to hide. One evening, when she was in the shower, I seized the opportunity. My hands were trembling as I unlocked her phone, a mix of dread and determination coursing through me. I started scrolling through her messages, trying to find anything that could confirm my suspicions. For a while, everything seemed normal, conversations with friends, family, and work colleagues. But then, I stumbled across a chat thread with someone saved under the name Rob M. I opened the thread, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The messages were short, vague, but damning. They repeated the same phrases over and over, today as usual, same time. Let me know if there are any changes. And then, the one that hit me hardest, your payment for my silence. I stared at those words, my heart pounding in my chest. Payment for his silence? What the hell did that mean? I scrolled further back, trying to piece together more of the story. The messages were always brief, devoid of details, but they told me everything I needed to know. There was a routine, a hidden understanding between Rachel and Dr. Mitchell. But that one line, payment for my silence, echoed in my mind, twisting my stomach into knots. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was something darker. Was he blackmailing her? Had he coerced her into this relationship? My anger deepened as I realized that this wasn't just betrayal, it was manipulation. Dr. Mitchell wasn't just having an affair with my wife, he was exploiting her, using his position to control her. That was my breaking point. I wasn't going to sit back and let him get away with it. This was no longer just about my marriage, this was about stopping a man who had clearly crossed every line of professional and ethical conduct. I took screenshots of every incriminating message, making sure I backed them up in multiple places. I couldn't risk losing this evidence. The next morning, I reached out to a lawyer, a specialist in medical malpractice and ethical violations. When I explained the situation and showed him the screenshots, he listened intently, his expression growing more serious with every passing minute. Adam, this is more than enough to file a formal complaint, the lawyer said after I finished. If we can establish that Dr. Mitchell used his position to manipulate and exploit a patient, the medical board will launch an investigation. If they find sufficient evidence, it could lead to the revocation of his license. He won't be able to practice medicine again. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. I didn't care how long it would take or how difficult it might be, I was prepared to fight until the end. Dr. Mitchell needed to face the full weight of the law, and I wasn't going to stop until he did. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure he couldn't exploit anyone else ever again. I handed over all the evidence, the screenshots, the context of the affair, and my account of what had happened at the clinic. The lawyer assured me that they would start building a case immediately and contact the medical board to initiate an investigation. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of control. Dr. Mitchell had used his authority to manipulate my wife and tried to cover it up with secrecy and coercion. But now, I had the upper hand. I had the truth, and I was going to make sure it came to light. This wasn't just about my personal pain anymore. This was about justice. Dr. Mitchell had to lose everything, the respect, the power, the career he had used to hurt others. And I was going to be the one to make sure it happened. A few days after filing the complaint, things started to move quickly. My lawyer informed me that the medical board would be reviewing the evidence and that we could expect a formal investigation soon. I was ready. I wanted to see it through, no matter how long or grueling the process might be. Dr. Mitchell needed to face consequences, not just for me, but for anyone else he might have manipulated. Then, one afternoon, I got an unexpected call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering, something in my gut telling me this wasn't just a random call. "Hello?" I said cautiously. There was a brief pause, and then I heard a voice I instantly recognized. It was Dr. Mitchell. "Adam, we need to talk," Dr. Mitchell said, his tone sharp and uneasy. "There's more to this than you think. If you know what's good for you, you'll hear me out." I could feel my pulse racing, but I forced myself to sound calm. "There's nothing left to say, Dr. Mitchell. I've already filed a complaint, and I'm not backing off." "You don't get it," he snapped, sounding increasingly desperate. "You've been left in the dark about a lot of things. Your wife, the baby she's carrying, it isn't yours. And before you assume anything, it's not mine either." The words stopped me cold. My mind reeled, struggling to process what he'd just said. Sure, I had my suspicions that there was more going on, but this was a twist I wasn't remotely prepared for. "What do you mean it's not mine?" I asked, my voice barely audible. There was a brief silence before Dr. Mitchell spoke again, sounding more composed but still on edge. "Rachel came to me because she was scared out of her mind. She knew the child wasn't yours, and she didn't want you finding out. So she begged me to help her. She wanted me to fake a DNA test and make it look like the baby was yours." His words felt like a punch in the gut, knocking the air out of me. My head spun, and I struggled to find my footing in the storm of emotions raging inside me. "And you agreed to help her cover it up?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief and anger. "She didn't give me much choice," he replied coldly. "She was desperate, and I saw an opportunity. In return for my silence and for faking the test, I told her I had certain conditions. And she agreed. That's how it all began." I clenched the phone so tightly it hurt, my entire body trembling with rage. "So, you blackmailed her," I said through gritted teeth. "You took advantage of her fear to satisfy your sick demands, and now you want me to just forget it?" "It wasn't blackmail," he insisted, his voice growing defensive. "She needed a solution, and I had terms. She agreed. It was a mutual arrangement. But now, thanks to you, everything's falling apart. My practice, my reputation, it's all crumbling because you couldn't just let it go." A wave of fury surged through me, but I kept my composure. "So, what's this call about, then?" I asked icily. "To make excuses? To convince me you're somehow the victim here?" "I'm offering you a way out," he said quickly, his voice tinged with desperation. "Withdraw the complaint, and this whole thing goes away. I'll leave town. No one needs to know the details. You can still walk away from this and avoid the mess." I stayed quiet, letting his words hang in the air while I took a moment to steady myself. Every word he said only deepened my resolve. This man had manipulated my wife, exploited her, and now he was trying to worm his way out of the consequences. He thought I'd be weak, that I'd crumble under the weight of it all. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. "Thanks for calling, Dr. Mitchell," I said, my tone cold and deliberate. "You've just given me exactly what I needed, more evidence. And no, I'm not backing off. You're going to lose everything. I'll make sure of it." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a quieter, more menacing voice, he said, "You don't know what you're starting." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm starting," I said, my voice steady. "And you? You have no idea what's coming." Without waiting for a response, I hung up. My heart was still pounding, my hands trembling from the adrenaline. But something had shifted, I felt clearer, more in control. Dr. Mitchell had crossed every line imaginable, and now he was scrambling to protect himself. But it was too late for that. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It wasn't even about the baby or my broken marriage. This was about justice, about ensuring that Dr. Mitchell couldn't hurt anyone else. He had used his power to manipulate and exploit, and I wasn't going to stop until everything he had was stripped away, his career, his reputation, his future. I wasn't walking away. I was going to fight until the truth came out, no matter how long it took or how difficult it became. Because some things are unforgivable. Some things demand to be destroyed. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard him sigh, the kind of resigned exhale that told me he finally understood how serious I was. "You're making a big mistake, Adam," Dr. Mitchell said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." "No," I replied calmly, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. "You're the one who made the mistake. You thought you could manipulate everyone, hide behind lies, and get away with it. But now, it's over. Goodbye, Dr. Mitchell." I ended the call, my hands still trembling slightly, but with a strange sense of clarity settling over me. The truth was far uglier than anything I had imagined, but at least now, I had it. Dr. Mitchell had played his game well, but in his desperation to save himself, he had given me exactly what I needed to ensure he was brought down. The road ahead was going to be messy. Confronting Rachel with what I had learned would be one of the hardest conversations of my life, but I couldn't focus on that yet. My priority was clear: Dr. Mitchell had to pay. He had used his position to exploit, manipulate, and intimidate. I was going to make sure he never had the chance to do it again. It felt like I had been living in a storm for weeks, but finally, some clarity returned when the divorce was finalized. I had braced myself for a long, drawn-out battle, but Rachel, stripped of any leverage, had no choice but to agree to the terms. The truth was out, and she was left with nothing, no lies left to hide behind. We went our separate ways, the marriage officially over, but the emotional fallout was far from done. A few weeks after the divorce, word came through mutual friends that Rachel had given birth. I hadn't spoken to her, hadn't even considered reaching out, but I knew I couldn't leave things unresolved. I needed certainty. Arranging for a DNA test wasn't easy. I didn't want to open old wounds, but I had to know the truth. The results came back just as I feared: the child wasn't mine. Even though I had prepared myself for that answer, seeing it in black and white still hit me harder than I expected. It was as if every shred of hope, the last remnants of the life I thought I had, was ripped away. I thought I had steeled myself, but the reality of it was brutal. The betrayal was complete, leaving no room for doubt or second chances. Rachel didn't reach out after the results came back, and I didn't feel any need to contact her either. There was nothing left to say. She was on her own, forced to live in the wreckage of her lies. From what I heard, the man she had the affair with had walked away as well, wanting nothing to do with her or the child. In the end, her attempts to control everything had left her isolated, alone with a baby and no support. But while my personal chapter with Rachel had closed, one battle still remained, the case against Dr. Mitchell. The complaint I had filed, combined with the evidence I had gathered, had prompted a full investigation by the medical board. I was determined to see it through. When the trial began, I attended every hearing, intent on watching the man who had manipulated and preyed on others finally be held accountable. As the case unfolded, more stories surfaced. Other women came forward, sharing how Dr. Mitchell had used his position to pressure and exploit them. Their testimonies revealed a pattern of predatory behavior, suggestive comments during appointments, inappropriate actions that had gone unreported out of fear. Each story added another layer of disgust, another reminder of why I had to keep fighting. The more I listened, the angrier I became, not just for myself, but for all the people he had hurt. It was clear he had gotten away with this for far too long. But now, his world was unraveling, and I felt a grim satisfaction watching it happen. By the end of the trial, the verdict was clear. Dr. Mitchell was found guilty of multiple counts of professional misconduct, coercion, and abuse of power. The medical board stripped him of his license, ensuring he would never practice medicine again. But it didn't stop there. Due to the severity of the charges and the number of victims who had come forward, he was also sentenced to prison. For years, he had believed he was untouchable. He had built a life on manipulation and control, but now he would spend the next decade behind bars, stripped of everything he had once used to hurt others. When the judge read out the sentence, I felt a surge of relief. Justice had been served. But it was a hollow victory in some ways. Justice couldn't undo the damage he had caused, couldn't erase the scars left behind. I had lost my marriage, the future I had imagined, and part of myself in the process. It was a victory, but it had come at a cost. After the trial, I took time to reflect. It wasn't easy to move forward after everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, and the fight for justice had left me exhausted, both mentally and emotionally. But I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the past forever. I had to rebuild, piece by piece. I focused on work, reconnected with friends, and slowly began to find myself again. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this, but maybe that was okay. I had learned to trust my instincts, to stand up for what was right, and to find strength in the darkest moments. Months passed, and life started to resemble something normal again. The divorce was behind me, Dr. Mitchell was behind bars, and I was finally free from the weight of it all. It hadn't been easy, but I had made it through. As for Rachel, I heard bits and pieces about her through mutual friends. She was struggling, left alone with a child, working odd jobs to make ends meet. The man she had the affair with had abandoned her, leaving her to deal with the fallout on her own. The life she had tried so hard to control had crumbled, and now she was left picking up the pieces. But that was her path, not mine. I wasn't looking back anymore. I had fought my battles, endured the worst, and come out on the other side. My future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. Some victories come with scars, but they're still victories. And after everything, I knew one thing for sure, I was finally free.